I'd rather have a B product and an A team than an A product and a B team. It's economic rent is when you own a resource and you are going to start charging more for it without creating any additional productivity. That's what's going on today. And the statistics say 90+% of startups fail. I think it was Mark Twain said, it's not what you don't know that will hurt you. It's the thing you know for sure that just ain't so. Technology, it's an arms race, always. But there wasn't the technology on the fraudster side that there is now.
Welcome back to Multifamily Unpacked. Today's guest is Mike Britti, one of the key architects behind RealPage's $10 billion rise. Before leading mergers and acquisitions through some of the biggest deals in multifamily history, Mike founded and scaled multiple companies of his own, including one that sold to TransUnion. He now serves on Funnel's board and advises as a venture partner at RET Ventures and is a senior VP at Mirasol Capital. In this episode, we talked about what makes acquisitions succeed or fail, how innovation really happens, and why great teams beat great products. Let's get into it. Today's guest, Mike Britti, is someone I consider a friend and a mentor, also a boss, happens to sit on the Funnel board. But Mike, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Tyler, thanks for inviting me. I'll try to make you proud.
I'm sure that won't be too hard. Mike, you are somebody that I first heard about when I was competing against RealPage and at Entrada, and your legend precedes you, and you're known as the deal maker in multifamily, including helping Funnel with our first acquisition. As you think back, we're going to try something new here. We're going to ask you some get to know you questions up front. What's a deal that you helped put together, big deal that sticks out to you from the early days of acquisitions that you did? Maybe the first one or a big early one.
I joined RealPage in 2009, but the ones that stick out to me, there was a really busy period where we bought 4 deals between October of 2017 and mid-April 2018. So a very short period of time, closed 4 deals, over $800 million worth of purchases. Up to that point, and 3 of those deals were over $200 million. One was a small deal, was only $5 or $6 million, and that deal sucked, by the way, and I can talk about that in a second. But the 3 big deals, again, we had never done a deal over, I think, 70 million. And then all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, we closed 3 really big deals. And that was On-Site Manager, LRO, and ClickPay.
Wow. Yeah, those are some huge ones. I worked at LRO prior to the acquisition and was at Entrada, I think, when the On-Site deal closed. So I remember those vividly. Those were large acquisitions, probably some of the biggest in multifamily history at the time.
Yeah, and they all worked out great at the time.
That's right.
One, which will remain nameless, unless you want to talk about it, not so much. So.
Yeah, it may have caused some issues downstream. Just to continue on the get to know you, are there any kind of M&A trends perhaps that you've seen throughout your career, or just things that look different today than they did in the past, or perhaps bad M&A that you've seen that kind of people convince themselves of one thing and another is true?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's important to have historical perspective in anything, but in our industry, it's good to know about that history. And the statistics say 90+% of startups fail, and they fail in the first few years. And some go on for years and then fail later. But the point is, most of them fail, right? And I guess it's the old Anna Karenina principle from Leo Tolstoy, right? All happy families, all happy companies are alike. All unhappy companies are unhappy for a different reason. And so there's lots of ways for you to fail. You can have bad funding problems. You can have bad product market fit. The other market dynamics can be bad. You can have personnel problems. Having the perspective of knowing the history in our industry, I think, is very important. And we can talk some more about that history and how we got to where we are. But it's important because I think a lot of people fail to understand that.
Yeah, I think that we referenced in the intro, folks know about the $10 billion Thoma Bravo RealPage exit. And candidly, the way we've framed this podcast is looking at the historical lens, because I think as a new generation of companies and leaders come into multifamily, I couldn't agree more. Understanding the context is critical because, as folks say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. There's a lot that can be learned from the success that you and the RealPage executive team, we have Leslie Turner on the funnel team who was part of that team. There's so many times I turn to her and say, how did you guys do this? What things do you wish you would have done differently? And so on one of the things that I imagine showed up quite often, in particular, as you think about, I once heard Steve Wynn, for those who don't know, he was the CEO at RealPage during that tenure, reference that part of the strategy was finding organizations, companies, products that had gotten a certain amount of traction, often in the enterprise. They got some big innovative players to buy into the technology, but then we're having struggles moving downstream and selling it. And that was where he thought there was opportunity for RealPage to add value with the great sales motion. I'm curious, as you looked at these earlier stage companies, what stood out to you more as a marker for ongoing success within the RealPage product? Was it the product itself? And you all thought, hey, you know what, because Onsite is such a quality screening product, we'll bring it into our team, period. Or in case of Onsite, we've had Monty is a good friend of ours as well. Was it more the team and maybe there's some gaps in the product? And I think I asked that because we have a lot of entrepreneurs listen to this and they're trying to figure out, none of us feel like we're there yet. But when you were looking at M&A, if you had to pick one or the other, what matters more, product or team?
Team.
Team.
I'd rather have a B product and an A team than an A product and a B team, always. And that was and look, let me start by just saying Steve Wynn is a visionary and a genius. Can't say enough good stuff about him. It was his strategy. I was his amanuensis. I just followed him around, took really good notes. I was Boswell to his Dr. Johnson. He was the man who was the genius behind all this. And I like to think I did a good job executing on his vision. So anyway, to further answer your question, I think it's important that people understand there was, going back 10 years or even further, there was no market for a lot of these things. The prop tech market didn't exist. There wasn't a lot of private equity investing in it. There wasn't VC money going into it. There wasn't an exit until really Steve started the ball rolling way back in 2007 by starting to buy up these little companies. It created an exit for people who had started these things. Before that, there wasn't a lot you could do for an exit on those things. So it was interesting. And, nowadays we take for granted that, the market's awash with money. There's private equity money and all this other money, but it's not always been there.
Yeah, really well said. It's actually something that I've noticed. The world has matured of multifamily. I like to tell people that, to me, multifamily is like Reno, Nevada. It's the biggest little industry in the world, or littlest big industry, I think.
I like it.
But you're right that it was incredibly, there was no build or buy. It was build. Build or die is what it used to be. And I think, to your point, even competing against RealPage, I don't think we appreciated just how sound the strategy was, because this is an industry, if you have a quality product and a quality team, it's incredibly sticky, right? We have high retention rates among software purchasing decisions. And I will say, probably to your point on the team being more important, if I just go down the list of really impressive leaders at RealPage, I mentioned Leslie Turner, who now runs services at Funnel, right? She was originally part of the OneSite product, right? And then went on to lead additional teams. I've got great friends like John Hinckley, right? Who went on to lead great teams, was another acquired leader that you all did.
Modern Message, yeah.
Modern Message makes a ton of sense. And so I think if you roll forward that, whether you're answering that question in terms of a product skill set, a team skill set, or just an individual leadership, you referenced you got to work with Steve. I'm sure you got to work with a lot of great leaders in putting these deals together. Is there a skill that you feel is perhaps underrated in leadership today?
Selling.
Selling.
Every good or great CEO has to be good at selling, and they have to be good at selling in a number of ways. They have to be able to sell to the market, right? You got to be able to get customers to buy it, right? And so you have to be able to have a vision and get that vision across. to the customers. And you also have to sell. To put together a good team, you got to sell them on your vision. And that's huge, because if you don't have a good team and you might be able to sell to customers, but you don't have the people to back you up. And the third thing you have to sell to is the money market, right? Venture money, private equity, angels. Someone's going to, unless you happen to be independently wealthy, you're going to need to get somebody else's money. And you have to sell them on the vision too. And they're all different kinds of sales, right? Because selling to the customer is a value proposition. Selling to the team is, hey, you're going to do really well here. This is a great company. I'm going to build a great culture. Like, you've done a great job at funnel building a great culture. People love working there. That is a huge competitive advantage. So people forget how important that stuff is.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Mike. And I think that we also do have a lot of sales professionals listen to this podcast. And I've always told, even competitors will reach out, like top sales reps at the PMSs or other AI competitors will reach out and say, hey, we love seeing a sales guy as a CEO. And what I always tell them is, I'm doing the exact same job I've always done. It is selling, right? And it's whether it's to investors or to my team members. And it's, if you're genuine about your belief in your product and your platform, we're all setting a vision for where we're going to go, because nobody buys one site for what it's doing today. They're buying it for where they're going to be on that platform in 2 or 3 years. So I appreciate that. That answer is very salient. Now, the last one here to get to know you, then I do want to go back into the past and unpack some of these. As you think about the different roles that you've played. So we framed you as the deal guy, but I know you're much more than that. That's why I wanted you to join the funnel board. I know from the team members who have worked for you that you're more than that. So as you think about your impact, both at RealPage and just broadly, where do you really find your own purpose? Is it in putting together a deal that somebody undervalued, finding that diamond in the rough? Is it really the advising that you get to do to founders? You also sit on the board of StarRes, another residential company that's grown tremendously over the last 5 years. So I'm curious, of the multiple roles that you've played, is there one that you find the most fun?
Being semi-retired is my favorite role, only because I'm getting old now. But honestly, I love working with people, and particularly people I like. I try not to work with people I don't like. It's important. What I like is helping people meet their goals, right? There are people, they have a vision. I hear it, I get excited, and I want to help. And that's what I like to do. And so it worked out really well, because a lot of times we go to buy a company and I got to meet some of the most wonderful people in the world. Some not so much, but most were very good, wonderful people, smart, had a cool vision, and executed on it. And it was nice to be able to make something good happen for them. So.
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing. And yeah, I certainly have seen, again, when we've got to interact with you and we meet these shared team members, the light that comes into people's eyes when they think about their interactions with you is incredible. And especially because it's a hard job sometimes being the deal maker. Not everybody feels that the deal was cut the best way for them. So to have so many fans of yours is really impressive, Mike.
Thank you. I'd like to think that most of them, not all, would give me a good recommendation if I asked.
Agreed. Well, thus far, I've been trying to find one that wouldn't, and I would say they all have. Now, let us go back in time. So you mentioned you joined RealPage in 2009, I believe you said.
That's right.
So what were you doing before that? How did you make your way to RealPage? And then in particular, what did you highlighted? PropTech didn't really look like PropTech today, certainly not the big multi-billion-dollar outcomes that we've seen. But what did RealPage look like at that point in time in terms of kind of the company and product offering?
Yeah, it was strange. Look, I competed with RealPage, just like you.
Yeah.
I had started a number of companies or been among the founders of a few different businesses, most of which didn't do well. But I had a screening business that ultimately I ended up selling, and that was a 10-year thing. And that was the last thing I did before RealPage. And it was a nice business, sold it to TransUnion. It still exists, by the way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, I think that one of the things you said at the outset of 90% of companies fail, I think that those of us who started our careers in safe places and good companies really underappreciate how hard it is to get across the proverbial chasm to having a company that is worth an exit. And so I think having that perspective on just how hard that is informs a lot of the strategy that you see going forward. So you referenced already that there wasn't a ton of deals going on. RealPage itself, as I understand it, and I loved studying the history of this, was a bit of a spinoff from a different platform. Maybe give the audience just a little bit of factoids around, there's a product in there called Little Buddy, I believe. What was the core product offering, and what was that DNA?
It's very funny, right? And I hope I don't mess up the story. And Steve, if he watches this, I apologize, Steve, if I get the story wrong. But Steve had a business called CLR. Yeah, he sold it to a big, huge company, forget the name. And they were that company. He said, "Hey, I'll stick around for a year. After that, I'm going to go do something else." And he did, and he was a man of his word. He on his way out, and they were all very friendly. He just said, "Hey, there's this business of yours that I'd like to buy, and if you guys don't mind spinning it out." And so they said, "Yeah, okay." And then they showed him the business, and then they said, "Oh, but it also includes this thing, Prentice Hall, which is Little Buddy," and they said, "You got to take that also." And so he looked into it, and at first he was like, "I don't even want that thing." And then the more he got into it, he realized, hey, there's nobody else really doing anything in this industry. So then he said, "Okay, you can keep the rest of the stuff. I'll just take that." And that's how it got started. And then he built it up. It was, at the time, it was CDs, and it was a desktop application, all that stuff. And he jumped to browser-based right away, more or less. And that was a big deal because nobody was doing that. And because most people went to a thin client first and all this other stuff. I don't know if this terminology is confusing anybody. I don't blame you, because you have to be old enough to remember all that stuff. But the idea is he had the vision for where he wanted to go right away. And anyway, and then he bought a bunch of businesses to make the rest of it work.
Yeah, well, actually, it's just a really interesting learning there. I remember Steve has not done many podcasts. I hope he listens and comes on. But one he did with our friend Steve Lefkowitz once, he talked about the important moment in time in which he was selling the vision of cloud-based software, similar to what kind of Salesforce did. Those people forget, but there were CRMs before Salesforce. They were DOS-based, right? And they were, or Windows-based. And Salesforce was the first cloud-based, right? And that was the .com era. And so everybody was rebranding their company to be such and such .com. And to your point, that technology change created an opportunity for RealPage and for others to move in. And frankly, even companies like Entrada got their genesis in the early kind of 2000s, 2003, I think Entrada was founded. But I remember Steve referencing getting Camden to buy into cloud-based software was this watershed moment for RealPage. And it would appear to me that Steve, as an entrepreneur, and RealPage, we're always looking a little bit ahead of the curve and saying, where is the market going? It's a growing, evolving market. Would that be a fair way to frame how things ended up on your acquisition list? Or was it a little bit more financial engineering of, hey, we've got to get scale? Looking at it historically, it looks to me like you were identifying emerging market segments as they came in and then bringing them into the platform.
A good point. Obviously there was a number of ways we identified companies we were going to buy. Among them, and I can talk about that, we were always looking to either strengthen a current product offering or accelerate innovation, and so go do something new and get there faster by doing a purchase, or to meet customer demand more rapidly. Now, what's interesting about, and I'll talk about customer demand in a second, or we were looking to expand our total addressable market, our TAM, by getting into an adjacent market, right? But what's interesting about customer demand is a lot of times the customer doesn't know it wants something until that thing exists, right? There's this French economist named Say's law: supply creates its own demand. And that makes sense, right? You didn't know you needed a cell phone until they existed. You didn't know you needed a desktop computer until they existed. But then once those things exist, you can't do without them. So anyway, that's that. And so it's getting ahead. Sometimes the customers tell you what they want. Sometimes you have to tell the customer what they should want.
That's very true. Yeah. And I think that, to your point, I've always felt that today's customer demand is certainly not only a reflection of the supply of what options are available to them, but really years of kind of evolution that led to that current demand. And so when I see entrepreneurs, for instance, looking at the market today and coming out with, I don't want to pick on anybody, but another fraud tool, for instance, right? Yes, there's absolutely a need for fraud. And folks like Snapped that saw that years ago are well positioned to take advantage of that. I think as entrepreneurs and as platforms, the bigger opportunity is to get right where the market's going in the coming years. You referenced obviously that you had run a screening company as well. I've referenced Camden already, but there's another company that had big impact on multifamily technology, and that's Archstone, right? And so that's a company that you know well. And as I go across multifamily, there's leaders all over the place that have that Archstone DNA. Having spent time there, is there something about their focus on technology or experience that perhaps allowed them to stand out? And am I right that it's really was a bit of a predecessor to a lot of the technology platforms and more technology focused operators that we see today?
No, you're right. I've been in multifamily for a very long time, which explains why I look so old. But it's way back when you'd go visit a property and potentially, because I used to also buy properties for companies a long time ago. And you'd go in and the management company, you'd ask them a question and they'd say, hold on a second. And then there'd be like 10 big, huge books with lots of pages in them in a binder that were the standard operating procedures. And they'd pull down the standard operating procedures and they'd flip through it and everything else. That meant it didn't change very often. Your standard operating procedures lasted for a very long time. And the people who were in the industry didn't change. It took visionaries like Camden, Archstone, UDR, people like that who realized that technology was an advantage. You could serve your residents better, faster, and cheaper if you applied technology, and that would be a big advantage because the resident experience was so much better. And it just makes sense. A lot of what Funnel does and a lot of what the best companies out there are doing is making the resident experience great. They're sitting in the background. The resident may have never heard of them, but they're getting a much better experience because of that. And also, by the way, it keeps the price, even though rents have been going up dramatically, it keeps the price down because it's cheaper to manage a property with technology than with tons of humans.
Maybe to turn that to today, because I do think you're right that, and by the way, as a side note, I don't think I had the full realization till just now that Denver is a real hotbed for multifamily innovation, right? Because between Archstone and Aimco and UDR, and
Avanti is here, yeah.
Avanti is there, that's right. And many of the technology startups that we've seen have emerged out of that market.
It's the thin air, by the way. It's makes you think you can do anything.
That's smart. Yeah, I need some of that. I am from Utah originally, but here in Tampa, yeah, the air is not thin. So as you think about the decades of experience you have in M&A, obviously, as you mentioned, both doing property acquisitions, and you look at the current moment in time, that we're in, interest rates are still very high. M&A activity has cooled down for the last several years. Just looking at RealPage, for instance, right? Like they've only done a couple of deals since you've left, but it appears they've done, I think, 2 this year. Do you think the old playbook holds true of kind of the things that we've looked at before? Or do you think in this new kind of where we are today, that it might look a little bit different? Just curious kind of your read on decades of M&A experience. Does the playbook that you deployed so well at RealPage still apply?
So look, I got lucky. I was in at a good time. Now there are a lot more people competing for a lot of these deals, which bids the price up. So it makes it harder to do a roll-up strategy, and it makes it harder to move the needle as a business like a RealPage, right? You got to do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of a transaction as opposed to a bunch of $50 million deals or something like that. And so it's become much more difficult. It's bad for the big companies, really good for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because if you can get a market niche, you potentially can have a buyer.
Yeah.
So it has changed, yes.
Yeah. And so on that point, I mean, as we think about the ecosystem and landscape of PropTech, and when I talk to folks in other kind of adjacent verticals. Like you mentioned, you work with StarRes and they do on-campus housing and international markets. It seems to be there's a lot of similar challenges. And one of those challenges that is universal, probably not just to prop tech, but certainly in prop tech, is getting a foothold, establishing a niche when integrations can be challenging, right? Because the platforms that have been created by the big PM softwares, whether through building or through acquisition, inherently are designed to flow the usage and the revenues through the pipes, the approved pipes. What you just articulated, and one of the examples, for instance, previously would be an on-site. On-site only works with integrations, right? It has to be integrated into the PM software and all the different tooling to work. Do you think if you look compared to the environment that you all helped create to today, have integrations improved? Are we in a better place? And how should, both multifamily operators and entrepreneurs think about how much can I break the tech stack and innovate with new products if I'm dependent on these integrated solutions?
No, look, it's a very good question. The problem I see is, and I know you probably feel this pain, is there's only 4 or 5 companies that everyone has as that if I'm a multifamily owner, I'm only going to use one of these guys. And it's very sticky once you're using their leasing and rents and accounting system. It's really hard I heard someone now, I wish I could remember who said it, the best accounting system for your company is the one you're currently using. Because it's so hard to change. It wasn't so bad until very recently, but up until recently, people thought, okay, I got to integrate. If I'm RealPage or Yardi or whatever, I'm going to integrate with lots of people, and it's not really going to be a closed system. They're becoming more closed, and that's economic theory at work, right? There's this theory about rent seeking, and rent seeking doesn't mean people paying their lease, right? It's economic rent is when you own a resource and you are going to start charging more for it without creating any additional productivity. That's what's going on today. There are companies that they're rent seeking. They realize they can do that. It's a short-term strategy, by the way, because it doesn't work forever. It only works until customers get tired of it and start leaving whoever's rent seeking the most. Adam Smith talked about this way back in 1776 in his great book about the Wealth of Nations. And so it's been going on forever. Usually people get rent seeking by getting a government monopoly, but oligopolies do it as well. They don't even have to talk to each other. They just know, they see in the marketplace what's going on, and they realize, oh, somebody else is rent seeking, I'm going to do the same.
I think obviously in a capitalist economy, as you said, that we hope the long-term impact of that is that it creates opportunity for innovation. But you're correct, for instance, today, every one of the PM softwares now charges for integrations, which I'm not saying that's right or wrong. There is a lot of work that goes into it.
They should charge. How much they should charge.
Correct. The rent seeking, the increased value comparative to, none of them have webhooks yet. So I'll say that. None of them have increased the value of the way in which you integrate with them, but they're all charging. And in many cases, the fees are going up. But maybe to double click on that, I would be concerned as someone who's passionate for multifamily. I'm biased. I'm an entrepreneur for a quasi startup, now scale up. But the playing field, the system's getting more closed, I would assume means it's harder to get off the ground. And
absolutely. That's the problem, is that it's harder to innovate, because if you have a little niche, you got to pay the toll from these other folks. At some point, that toll makes it harder. Now, the good news is, right, it's also easier to start up a company nowadays because of Azure and AWS and all these other systems. Used to be you had to go buy a whole bunch of servers and spin up your own huge IT team. Now you can outsource all that. You can outsource HR. You can outsource your CRM to Salesforce. You can do all these other things that you used to have to do in-house. At the same time, that toll, it makes it harder to innovate, because you think, oh, initially I'm only going to go after a segment of the market that has this company, the first one I integrate with, as their system, their accounting system.
Yeah.
So it's just harder.
Yeah, fascinating. Mike, just keeping focus on today, you get to advise and sit on multiple boards. I'm going to put a compliment here just because I know you won't like it, but I'll bury a question in there as well. I've appreciated your perspective as both a former entrepreneur, someone who knows multifamily inside out, that you are always willing to share a point of view. I always find a lot of value in our conversations. You don't hold back, but you have a clear respect for the job of being a CEO, an entrepreneur, running a business. And I'm curious, if it appears to me that the experience you have informs the way in which you advise now. So am I correct in perceiving that way as a CEO on a board that you sit
Oh
on?
yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate the but that's exactly right. Look, the hardest thing is, I think it was Mark Twain said, it's not what you don't know that will hurt you. It's the thing you know for sure that just ain't so. It's important when advising people or when you're talking about business and different options. We all have our own biases, and confirmation bias is everyone has it. And so what happens is it's very important to always realize, okay, this is what I think, but I could be wrong. And here's how I could be wrong, because it's important to make sure that way you're really giving good advice. You're not just giving your opinion and saying, yes, this is from the Oracle, you must do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. I've got a running tally, by the way, of quotes that you've done. We're gonna summarize them. I think we're up to 12. You're obviously a very well-read man. Mike, your experience as a operator was, as you mentioned, in the screening world. I look at the world today, and I referenced this earlier, and clearly fraud is a challenge in multifamily. But also, it seems like entrepreneurs have all keyed in on this, and there's a lot of different technology solutions available to operators now. I'm curious if you put back on either your Archstone hat, your screening CEO hat, your RealPage hat. What is this moment in time of a plethora of solutions, but still a kind of core challenge of fraud? How does this compare to previous iterations of screening, which is at its core, obviously it's about finding the right renter for the right home and mitigating risk. But it feels like a somewhat different moment than how screening was that to me looked like a commodity 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, in fact, up until 3-4 years ago, screening hadn't changed much and it was a commodity. And you're absolutely right. Look, there's the industry statistics speak for themselves, right? I was just reading an article. So 93.3%, so very accurate, of operators say they're experiencing some form of fraud in the past year. And that's huge. When I was running a screening company, fraud was not that prevalent. And it's increasing, right? Apparently 40% increase in the number of fraudulent applications, things like that. And the reason is obvious, right? Technology, it's an arms race, always. But there wasn't the technology on the fraudster side that there is now. AI can imitate stuff so well. There's so much better technology to fake documents. There's all sorts of things you can do today right off of the internet, which is ridiculous, but you can become a fraudster faster than you can apply for most jobs. Now, the good news is there's really good technology to counter that, but it requires people to not be complacent because you got to change your processes. You got to seek out those solutions and you've got to use them. And, oh, by the way, the solution you picked 3 years ago isn't going to work tomorrow. And so you always have to be thinking about fraud and how I'm going to meet the problem. And it's too bad, but that's just the cost of doing business.
No, Mike, one more question about today and other technologies. So fraud is a hot topic. Of course, AI is the big topic. And you were a entrepreneur during the dot-com era bubble, right? You ended your run with RealPage in what now we all look back on as a bit of a bubble, right? 2021 valuations when we were all in lockdown were incredibly high, historically high. But in each of those cases, there are enduring technologies, right? A lot of the virtual work from home technology we're using on this call came out of the COVID explosion. The obviously internet in general and .com and cloud-based computing is still with us. So in spite of the there was hype, there was a bubble, and there was a reality of long, sustainable, wonderful companies like RealPage and Salesforce and many others. So how would you think as an entrepreneur that has the wisdom of seeing multiple cycles about the current AI moment? There's a lot of promise, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of valuation increases, but we also probably can assume there's maybe some misaligned expectations from reality.
Now, I'll do another quote. Okay, I think it was Winston Churchill, right? The longer you look back, the further you can look forward. AI is new, but the disruption from it is nothing new. Disruption's been going on forever. It's good to think about how in those earlier eras, how people dealt with that disruption. An example, people who were very slow to get on the idea of browser-based, and they're like, oh, that's not going to do well. And I'm still going to send shrink-wrapped CD-ROMs out and all that stuff. They went out of business.
Yeah.
So it's important to embrace technology and use it properly. It's also, right, there's the Gartner hype cycle. And if you're not familiar with it, look it up. It's a great thing to understand because that's a very accurate model for how technology works. At first, it's overhyped, and then there's this trough of disillusion where things didn't quite work out as much as they expected, and there's too much, there's overinvestment, and then it takes off again.
Yeah, the slope of progress, right?
That's right, the slope of progress. You can be too late embracing technology. Being too early, I'd rather be too early.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's now turn to going forward. I think that, are there any areas as you think about, you get to again operate in more of a, you say you're semi-retired, but it doesn't seem like it to me. You're always available. Are there areas of innovation that may perhaps be underutilized or perhaps folks aren't working on yet? Particularly, you get to advise a couple of different investment firms like RET, our wonderful VC investors, that are looking more at the seed stage. Are there any areas that, like you mentioned, PropTech in general didn't exist, and then there weren't all the little segments? Is there anything that may be on your radar that perhaps doesn't have all the shiny attention of, say, chatbots and centralization that funnel sells?
I'm not smart enough to see into the future. Think what's really good. If I was, I wouldn't be I'd be busy building that company, not being semi-retired. But what I think is fascinating is that often people look and say, oh, and I'm not going to name names, but they look and they say, look at that company, that they're killing it. They're doing a great job. They own that space. If a single company owns that space, that's not for long. That's not the way the world works. And so a lot of innovation is to reimagine what someone who's already successful is doing and do it. And sometimes you only have to do it a little better to win all the business. Yeah. And that's, to me, where a lot of the future innovation is going to come. A lot of it's incremental. And people think, oh, insurance, HO4, it's a sleepy thing. It's always going to be the same. And then people have come along and said, no, I'm going to reimagine it. I'm going to make it better. And they did. And again, I don't know how much better they are, but they're better enough.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where the future innovation is going to come from, is people reimagining what other people are doing and doing it better.
That's wonderful advice. Yeah. And I think you're right. In our industry, in every industry, there's no zero-sum winners, right? There's a reason you referenced that there's 4 or 5 big PM softwares in our industry. They all fundamentally do the same thing, but depending on your portfolio and your strategy, one is better for you. And I know, like at Entrada, our big innovation early on in PM software was cloud-based, but so were the others eventually. But then it was student housing, right? We were the best student housing provider. We had really great functionality around that.
Still are, by the way.
Fantastic student housing PM software. All right, you know what? I think this is a really great place for us to wrap up and just make sure that the audience really got a good sense for Mike. And I've really enjoyed unpacking your multifamily experience. Mike, we've got this billboard here in Tampa that sits right outside my office. We got that billboard for you, Mike, and we said, hey, put something on there that is multifamily focused or otherwise. Maybe it's another Mark Twain quote, or we can go with John Wayne this time. You haven't quoted him yet. Anyway, what's a quote or an opinion of Mike Britti's that we could put on that billboard?
I'm going to go back to the Roman Empire. This too shall pass. So no matter what your problem is, this too shall pass.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's a great one. All right. No, so you, Mike, are semi-retired. What's something outside of multifamily and doing deals that you're passionate about? Maybe a philanthropic cause, that something you would enjoy spending more time on?
Well, over my career, and particularly when I was younger and had more free time, I was very heavily involved in homeless issues and worked at homeless shelters, was on the board of several homeless shelters, and worked with ways of dealing with homelessness. It's an intractable problem. A lot of it, people think, oh, the best way to do it is to build super cheap housing. That's not the only way to fix it. It's only a part of a solution. Anyway, it's a big problem, requires a lot of work, and it requires people also to show up and talk to people and be nice to folks in need. And so anyway, I've always done that, and there are a number of charities I'm involved with that deal with that issue. And it makes sense. I'm in the home building industry or the home making industry. So anyway, that's something I'm passionate about.
Well, Mike, that's fantastic. So we, Funnel, we have a charity called Home, to your point. What I've always felt, having had some exposure to other charities that do work in the space of homelessness, Home by Funnel was designed to be really focused on what one of our partners, Entryway, calls as housing ready individuals. And that is in particular because there are, to your point, so many more nuanced challenges in homelessness, right? My mother works with individuals coming out of sex trafficking. I have a lot of family members that have dealt with substance abuse issues, and all of those obviously show up and more in homelessness. Are there any charities in particular that you could mention that the folks might look up?
One of my favorites is, and I haven't done work for them for years, but I worked with them for a decade, and I was on their board. There's a group called the Calvary Women's Shelter in Washington, D.C. It's a great organization. It does exactly what you were describing.
I love, Mike, that I'm not surprised to hear this about you, but I think that I find the same fulfillment. And we are very blessed to be able to work in an industry where providing homes and serving the housing industry, the rental housing industry specifically, provides for us. I think Funnel does not believe that our charitable initiative is going to solve housing and affordability or homelessness. But I think all of us, if we think about ways to give back from this industry that's given us so much, there's a lot more that we can do. So happy to hear that. Appreciate the reference. All right. So Mike, we've talked a lot about the past of multifamily. You get to be involved in organizations now that are helping build that future. But for you, if we were to say the future of multifamily is blank, what is it? What does the future of multifamily look like to you?
I'll go with my earlier statement. It's going to look a lot like the past. So learn about the past, understand that the ups and downs in the industry, the disruption caused by technology, it's going to look like the past, only different.
Yeah. And I think that's very relevant right now, given that everyone feels like the supply-demand imbalance, which right now, if you're on the pro side of we as an industry want to build more housing, it's working very well right now to keeping housing affordability in a good place. But if you're an asset manager who underwrote 10% rent growth in Austin, it doesn't feel that great. So we'll go back to your billboard and say, this too shall pass. If you look in the past, eventually those rents will grow again. That's right. All right, Mike.
If you let the market work, it will. So I'm an ardent capitalist.
Yeah. Well said. That's right. Yeah.
I like Jay. Yeah.
He's fantastic. All right. Last one. What's a value or principle, Mike, that you refuse to compromise on?
Life is too short to work with people you don't like or drink cheap wine.
The profound wisdom, Michael. I appreciate the time. And frankly, the fact that you want to work with people you like. I'm honored that you took this call and that you're on the Funnel board. Normally, Mike, we ask folks to promote their company or where they're at. So I guess we'll just help people to go check out funnelleasing.com and support us over there.
Yeah. And if you want to get in touch with me, send a very nicely written letter, care of Funnel, and I promise I will write back old school.
There we go. I'm sitting at the front desk at Funnel. I'll get it for you. Right, Mike, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right. Great talking to you.
Thanks for tuning in. If this episode got you thinking, Here's the next step. Join us at the Forum, the best conference in multifamily, March 23rd to 26th at the JW Marriott Camelback Inn in Scottsdale. I can assure you Forum is not the average conference. It's built for multifamily executives who are rethinking how teams, technology, and operations come together to deliver standout renter and team experiences. If that sounds like you, this is where you need to be. Registration's open now at the link in the show notes. Heads up, Forum sells out every year. Don't wait. Grab your seat at the best rate today. We'll see you in Scottsdale.